Hi guys, my name is Kretz and today I'm gonna break your brain a little bit, so to say. Because what do you say if I tell you that all the numbers and figures that are written on your lens, like physically, there are some, numbers, letters, words, and, well, exactly figures, are false. I'm telling you, they are maybe not so much wrong, but they absolutely 100% deceiving. So all the figures that you see written on your lens are really deceiving, and they do not give you the exact information on what picture you're going to receive when you take pictures or videos, well, like any images still so moving. Well, how's that? We all get used to what's written on the lens and we have the basic general idea, but I'm telling you, this idea is very, very approximate. And of course, I'm going to tell it all you in details, but that's going to be a really, really big and thorough talk. So you better make time, make a strong coffee or tea, whatever you prefer, and find a cozy place to sit still and stay with me and listen to what I'm saying. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to find some nice place to sit, get my drink, and let's get started. And of course, I'm not gonna only tell you why these figures are wrong, what's wrong with these figures, but of course we'll discuss what we should substitute these figures with and what all the manufacturers of lenses should be actually writing on the lenses for us users to get the real idea of what picture we're gonna be having. All right, here's me and my coffee, and we're in a relatively quiet but, well, definitely public place. And without further ado, let's get started. So I have some lens here. This is a lens, and there are definitely some figures on it. Let me try and show it to you. Here are the figures. You see a lot of figures, and let's just read them one by one and figure out what each one actually means and why is it really, really false. So the first of them that you see on any lens is actually so-called focal length. So in this instance, this is 35 millimeters. It can be whatever. Sorry, it can be one figure with the prime lens like this, with the fixed focal length. So it's just the one figure over here. Let me show it to you. Come on. 35, you see, 35 millimeters here. And if that's a zoom lens, you'll get the range, say from 24 to 105, or maybe 70 to 300, whatever. You get the range, the lowest focal length and the highest focal length, so to say. And this is all wrong. Why? Let's first Google and see what the focal length actually is. I get my phone because it's a big talk and I have a lot of notes here. Well, what is called focal length? Let's read. It's the distance between the pole of the mirror, or the optical center of the lens, and the focal point of the mirror, or the lens. Well, alright, that's kind of like a scientific description. But how it's explained? Focal length tells us about angle of view, how much of the scene will be captured, and the magnification, how large individual elements will be in the picture. And I'm telling you, both of these statements are false, wrong, or at least deceiving. And I'll explain it to you, like literally right now. So why it does not give us the exact information on the angle of view and the magnification. It's not true, both of it. Now, as you see, the focal length, it actually has nothing to do with the picture at all, because the focal length is the value that is measured inside of the lens. So as you see from the description, the optical center of the lens, so it's all inside of the lens, and the focal and the focal point and the sensor itself, so it's all inside of the lens. It's the distance from where the actually the light rays are gathered, are focused, and the image sensor on which it actually falls. So it's all inside of the lens. So where's the picture here? Where's the image? Where's the angle of view? I don't see it, do you? The picture or the image is everything outside the lens. So that's all that's around me. It's not inside of the lens. Yes, of course, all these light rays go straight through the lens and on the image sensor, and then it goes through this so-called focal length, and then we see the picture. But the figure itself is inside of the lens, it's not outside, so it does not give us really the information about the angle of view. And of course, we got used to it, we got used to these millimeters. We know that independently from the image sensor size that you use, you really know that 24 millimeters on a full frame is quite wide if you use full frame for a decent amount of time. Or you know that 15 millimeters on cropped sensor is wide. You know that 100 is telephoto, 300 is telephoto. So you get the approximate idea how far you can shoot your subject and how wide your picture is going to be. But this is actually really approximate. We get used to it, but there is much more precise figure. I'll tell about it to you a little bit later. But now let me give you an example. These focal lengths, right? We take, well, say 35. And if you haven't done this, you can do it if you have enough lenses in your possession. I do, so I tried it and I figured it out. If you take the lens with a particular focal length and you take a number of lenses, it doesn't matter. They may be from the same manufacturer, but just different models. They can be from different manufacturers, or they can be from prime and the zoom lens, the same focal length, you say, that exists in the zoom lens, and you compare it to the same in the prime lens. So if you put the lenses with the same focal length in a row with the same camera, with the same image sensor size, you'll really see the difference in pictures. Well, some of them may be really quite close to each other, but some have a really big difference. So the actual angle of view, the width of your picture, can be really different. If you have different lenses with the same focal length, you saw it with your own eyes, just, confirm it to me in the comments down below. So how can that be? If the focal length actually gives us an idea of the angle of view, then how comes it that with the same camera, with the same image sensor size, and the same focal length actually gives us different width of the picture? Well, that is because these millimeters They don't give us an idea of the angle of view, really. I'll explain it to you a little bit later. And you can actually notice it by yourself. Just take different lenses with the same focal length and compare the actual angle of view. It differs, even if slightly, but it differs. It's not 100% precise. You can try it for yourself. Next, there is such thing that is called the focus breathing. It's when your angle of view actually differs depending on how far away your subject is, so how far you are focusing on your subject. And with the focus breathing, the actual angle of view actually changes as well. So with the same focal length, the angle of view may differ if you focus closer to your subject or far away. So again, with the same focal length, depending on the distance to your subject, the angle of view, the width of the picture actually changes. So again, these 35 millimeters doesn't actually tell us the exact width of the picture, because it can be different from the other lenses, and it can be different depending on the focus breathing that each lens has. It's the individual characteristic of the particular lens. So again, two factors where focal length is just simply deceiving. So it's not fact that focal length tells us exact angle of view. That's totally wrong. That's deceiving, and that depends on optical design of the lens, on different models of the lenses, and the focusing distance. So we proved this is false. And then the other statement was, which was that? It gives us an idea of the magnification. So how large individual elements will be. The longer the focal length, this article says, the narrower the angle of view and the higher the magnification. So long focal length, more magnification, we all know that 200, 300 is narrower than, say, 50 millimeters or whatever. Yes, in photography it sounds like true, but in scientific identification, so to say, the focal length, the idea of focal length is not the same, because there are different optical devices, and there are such devices as microscopes. Maybe you've heard about that. There are cameras, photographic, video cameras, but there are also optical devices called microscopes. And in the microscopes, actually, the magnification is achieved not by the focal length, but the distance between the lens and the subject. And in microscopes, I'm telling you, you can check it out for yourself. The wider, the lower the angle of, the lower the focal length, then the closer you can get to your subject, and thus getting more magnification. So if the lens has bigger focal length, then you cannot get as much to the subject, and you cannot get as much magnification. So in microscopes, it's totally the opposite to the photography. So you cannot say that focal length in all the instances definitely means more focal length, I mean more millimeters, more magnification. In microscopes, it's totally vice versa. So we proved it's again wrong. The focal length by itself does not give you an idea of magnification. It's very, very approximate, as well as with the angle of view. It's all approximate. It's not precise. So saying that and writing focal length on the lens is really, really deceiving. But what should we do about that? Well, all we care of, talking about the focal length and different focal lenses and zooms and primes and wide angles and normal lenses, telephoto lenses, of course, we are concerned with the angle of view. And if you attended school, maybe the mid-grades, the high school, you may remember the geometry course. And what is the angle of view actually measured in? Do you measure angle of view in millimeters? No, never. Angle of view is not measured in millimeters. Angle of view is measured in degrees. So focal length, there is a point of the lens where the lights are gathered, they are focused. And there is the angle of view which it gives you. And there are some degrees between these widest points. And you cannot deceive the degrees. They are always the same. No matter the lens, no matter the focal length, no matter the image size, the image sensor size, the degrees are degrees. How can you fake the degrees? They are always the same. So, if manufacturers actually wrote the angle of view in degrees on the lens instead of the focal length, then there would be no confusion. And yeah, again, and the other example of that focal length is wrong is when you change the image sensor size. Well, on full frame, the 35mm gives one angle of view, and on crop sensors, it's totally different. If you use the sensor size like in a smartphone, very tiny sensor, then it will be totally different angle of view. So how can focal length determine the angle of view when it's all different on different image sensors, right? That's another point. But if we use degrees, it does not matter which system, it doesn't matter which sensor size we have. The degrees are always degrees. So I would suggest it would be better that all the manufacturers actually wrote not focal length on the lenses, but the degrees of angle of view. And thus, we could have the absolutely precise knowledge of what width of the picture we will get on any system. It doesn't matter. By the way, it's quite popular with the smartphones now. I believe they got really tired of this mess, trying to recalculate the equivalent focal length with the mobiles, and we are all fed up to the throat with all these focal length equivalent recalculation and crop sensors and full frame and stuff. That's so tiring. But if we had the degrees, the mess would go away by itself. There would be no mess whatsoever. If on the smartphone we get the degrees, say 90-degree lens, and then we have on a full frame 90-degree lens, and we have in a cropped sensor, cropped format sensor 90 degrees lens, we know that all these three lenses actually give us precise width of the picture. So that's my first idea, the degrees of angle of view instead of focal lengths. And we'll finally get rid of all this freaking mess that's going on with this equivalent focal length and recalculation for different image sizes. That is my idea, that's first of my ideas. So the focal length written on the lens is wrong, it's deceiving, and we better substitute it all together with the degrees. Now next point, what I see on the lens. This particular one, 35mm, and the next figure is f2. f2, what is f2? Well, any of you will tell me right now that this is the aperture, or maybe some call it diaphragm, and some even call it iris or iris diaphragm. And what this is, and what does it belong to, what does it describe? Well, as they say, it has, just like the focal length, it has two values, so to say, to describe. Well, first, the aperture gives us an idea of how much depth of field we're gonna have, and thus how much blur, how much bokeh we have. So how much the out of focus areas will be, no matter in front of the focal plane or after it. So the depth of field, the distance between the out of focusing areas before what is in sharpness and after it. So this is depth of field and the bokeh itself. The character, the amount of bokeh. That's the first thing that they say about the aperture and why do we need this, why we need these f-stops, why we need this figure on the lens. And the other one is to get an idea how much light we get with the lens. We say f2, f5.6, f1.8, 1.4, whatever. How much light we get with this figure. And again, both of these are wrong, false and deceiving. Let me explain. First, this figure itself, a letter F slash and some fraction after it. What does this mean? And how does it correlate with the bokeh or with the depth of field or with the light? Well, again, like the focal length, it has nothing to do with the actual physical exposure outside of the lens. It has some correlation, and of course, because it affects the resulting picture, but it has nothing to do inside of the formula. So have you ever considered what this F letter actually means, like F2? Well, F literally means focal length. So there's a formula with focal length, and we just proved that the focal length is false by itself. So we put a false idea inside of the other false idea. So it's going to be double false, right? Let's get further. We have the focal length, the letter F, and then slash. What does slash means in the maths, in the science? It means divide. So we divide focal length by something, and then some fraction, but by some fraction. But what does it mean, actually? Well, let's do this. Let's get my calculator and say this is 35 f2. So I take 35 and divide it by 2, and I get 17.5 centimeters. And if I get my ruler, 17.5, well, this might be millimeters or centimeters. Oh, it's going to be millimeters, of course. 35 millimeters divided by 2, 37.5 millimeters. And that is actually the diameter of entrance pupil. Look here. Come on, refocus, please. So the front element is wider, but the actual entrance you see there, it's a little bit smaller inside, behind this filter. I have a filter here, but behind the filter you see this hole, this black hole. If we measure it with the ruler, then it's going to be 17.5 millimeters. So focal length divided by this, in this instance f2, the 2, 35 divided by 2, 17.5, and we got the diameter of the entrance pupil. So where's bokeh here? Where's the depth of field? Where's the amount of light? It has nothing to do with it. It's the focal length that's inside of the lens. It's the diameter of the entrance pupil, which is a part of the lens as well. And we have this some fraction. By the way, how this fraction comes to be? Well, quite the opposite. We divide the focal length by the diameter of the entrance pupil. So if we do the opposite, we have the entrance, we divide 35 millimeters of focal length by the diameter of 17.5 millimeters, and we get the number 2, and that is so-called aperture, the f/2. And in any lens, it's absolutely the same. So we have the same formula. Focal length divided by the number, and we have the diameter of the entrance pupil. So it does not correlate directly with the picture. It has nothing to do with the depth of field in millimeters. There is some correlation. There are some other formulas to calculate depth of field. We'll talk about it later. But now, that's the first point. And of course, this f-stop, this f number, can be variable as well in zoom lens with variable aperture, and thus this formula stays the same, but the result is different. So if we have the zoom lens from 3.5 at wide end and say 5.6 at longer end, what's happening? Well, while you're zooming, this lens tube actually extends, the focal length extends, and so the bigger focal length divided by the same diameter of the entrance pupil, of course, gives you a bigger fraction. But bigger fraction means actually less light. The less portion of light, so the formula is obvious and it's the same. But why doesn't it give us the exact idea of how much blur, how much bokeh and depth of field does it gives us? Well, absolutely the same as with the focal length. Just take different lenses by different manufacturers, or maybe the same manufacturer but different models. Take the lenses, the zoom lenses and prime lenses, and set it to the same focal length, to the same aperture, to the same distance to the subject, the same camera, the same ISO, so overall the same exposure, and you may easily see different bokeh. Bigger, smaller, rounder, different shape, different onion rings, cat eye shape, so the bokeh itself will look quite different on different lenses. So actually this f-stop itself doesn't give you the exact idea how bokeh will actually look like. It gives us the approximate idea of the depth of field, but not about the character of the bokeh, definitely, and even not the amount of bokeh. Why is that? Because the f-stop is just only one part of creating the bokeh, and actually the bokeh itself depends on many things. Well, first, overall, I mean in the resultant picture, it actually depends on the focal length. It depends on the subject to your distance to your subject, so the focusing distance, how far you focus, and on the f-stop as well, and it depends on the image sensor size as well. So at least these 4 variables actually affect the resulting bokeh, and the f-stop is not just only one of them. So it does not give us the exact idea of what kind and how much bokeh we actually receive. It's only very, very approximate. f1.8, f2, f5.6, yes, we have an approximate idea what we're gonna receive, but not precise, not scientifically precise. But what's more precise is we can actually calculate the depth of field in millimeters. There are formulas, that's a different topic, and we'll talk about that in another video actually. But yes, you can calculate the depth of field depending on the focal length and distance to your subject and the f-stop, but that's all these combined. The f-stop itself doesn't give us the precise idea of the bokeh and the depth of field. So it's again wrong that it gives us the certainty of the bokeh, of the character and the amount of bokeh. That's wrong. And now, and I'll give you example, the practical example, just in a few seconds. But first, we're gonna bust another myth that this f-stop actually tells us about the amount of light that the sensor gets. It's wrong and deceiving again, because it has nothing to do with the light itself. The light is the waves, they have some length, and we have a time of exposure, the amount of light that gets through the lens. Oh, the child is crying. I always feel so painful when kids are crying. I cannot stand it. I want to take care of them, but, you know, not my kids crying, sorry. Let's wait. And yeah, of course, the amount and the character of the bokeh very much depends on the optical design of the lens. The number of elements, their characteristics. We're gonna stop recording because we need to wait until the baby comes down. Alright, wrong daddy. They keep going and crying, he's not calming him down. I believe that's wrong. If you're a daddy, you must take care of your kids. And not making them cry, just calm them down. Do whatever it takes to be a good daddy and, you know, to solve the problem of your kid. That's your work, that's your job as a father. But, alright, not my kid, that daddy is gonna take care of it. So now, the optical design is very much responsible for what kind and what amount of bokeh you actually receive. And I'll give you an example. But first, but no, let me give you an example right now. And I have 2 examples, and they are both with the RF lenses. And there are the lenses for RF system, like I'm shooting with the R camera. These are full frame mirrorless cameras by Canon. And Canon has a couple of new lenses from RF line. And if we're talking about bokeh, there is a lens RF 85mm f1.2 L USM, I believe, lens, luxury, the best that Canon has. But there are actually two versions of it: the regular version and the DS version, the defocus smoothing version. And so one of them actually gives a little bit smoother bokeh, but both of them are 85mm and both are f1.2, but with the same aperture, with the same f-stop, and with the same focal length. So basically with the same overall characteristics, they give a little bit different bokeh. So the defocus smoothing actually gives bigger bokeh and smoother, maybe not exactly bigger, but smoother bokeh. So it really depends on the optical design, independently from the f-stop. But then this lens is actually a good example because to prove that this f-stop does not actually give us information about the amount of light as well. Why is that? Because this 85 defocus smoothing lens, although giving a smoother bokeh, at the same time robs you of one stop of light. So the exposure is one stop darker with this defocus smoothing, or maybe even one stop and a third, I can't remember exactly, but at least one stop. So the same aperture, the same focal length, basically the same lens. But with this feature, with this optical design, with defocus smoothing, it actually gives you one stop or even more less light. So how comes it? Because the f-stop is the same, but there is one stop less light. So it again proves that the f-stop itself doesn't give us an idea of the amount of light that lens gives you. It's just very, very approximate. Of course, we get an idea what picture we're going to have with the f2, with the 5.6, and if you're experienced enough, you know what kind of shutter speed, how fast you can shoot with some f-stops, but these are really, really approximate figures. And another example of telling you that f-stop does not give you an idea of the exact amount of light that the lens gets is the test that I performed myself. I happen to own EF lens, 35mm f2 L, not L, IS USM lens. It's quite modern lens. It's over 12 years old, but it's still contemporary, nice, very good lens. But it's f2, and with the RF line lenses, Canon actually started the 35mm f1.8 IS STM lens. So it's kind of like direct competitor to the old DSLR f2 lens. All kids are getting back. We need to wait. So I actually reviewed and compared these two lenses, the f2, 35 f2 from the DSLR world and this 1.8 from the mirrorless world. And to my surprise, they actually had the same amount of light transmitted. So I put them in the same exposure in the controlled environment. I set the same aperture, the same ISO, the same shutter speed, and I set one to f2 and another to f1.8, and I received exactly the same exposure, while it should be 1/3 of a stop different. Of course, 1.8 is 1/3 of a stop brighter than f2, but I received the same picture, which means that the light transmission from the RF35 1.8 is the same as the DSLR lens EF35 f2. That's another proof to you that the aperture is just relatively telling you about the light transmission, because it again depends on the lens characteristics, their amount of elements and groups, and their coatings and the materials of which I made, and the overall optical design and construction stuff. Because lenses with the different apertures can actually give the same exposure and vice versa. So that's another proof. And what should we do about it actually? And yeah, the same with the different image sensor sizes. If you put different lenses, even with the same aperture, on a different sensor sizes, you actually get the different depth of field, because angle of view differs, and you need to switch the focal length choose another focal length to compare the angle of view, to compensate for it, and maybe even exposure and distance to your subject to receive the same depth of field. So it's just, again, total mass with the different sensor sizes and different focal length and different f-stops. So actually, if you want really get exactly the same depth of field, if you are calculating the equivalent, you should not only recalculate the focal length, but also the aperture. So the example is, if you put the 50mm f1.8 lens on a cropped sensor, you will receive the picture that is equivalent to what would be on a full frame 80mm f2.9. And that is, again, not precise. It cannot be precise whatsoever, by the way. There's always an approximation, because 50mm, Canon's crop factor is 1.6 for APS-C sensors. So if you multiply 50 by 1.6, you get 80mm exactly. But if you multiply f1.8 by 1.6, then you receive actually 2.88. So it's closer to 2.9, but cameras don't have neither 2.88 nor 2.9. They have 2.8 or then 3.2, 3.5, and so on. So first there is an approximation, and second, there is an equivalent to the aperture as well, if you want to receive exactly the same width of the picture and exactly the same depth of the picture, which is depth of field. So 51.8 would be equivalent to 82.9 on a full frame. So that's, again, a mess. And of course, if you compare it to the smartphones, camcorders, point and shoots, it's going to be total mess again, recalculating the aperture and the focal length. So what should we do about that? Just like we substituted the millimeters in focal length with the degrees, we should better substitute these f-stops with something else. And concerning the light transmission, there is a substitution which is always used in cinematic lenses for cinema, and they use T-stops instead of the f-stop. And T-stops, it means translution or translucency, or maybe transmission, light transmission. I don't have the exact formula, it doesn't matter right now, but they use the T-stops, which actually present not the diameter of entrance pupil calculated from the focal length and stuff with the fractions. It's just the actual formulas that calculate the light transmission. So the f-stop is the exact amount of light. So with the lenses with the same T-stops actually receive the same exposure, the same amount of light. And they use it in the cinema lenses because it's very, very important, because cinema is a lot of frames. Moving frames, switching from other frame to another. Say 1 second in cinema is 24 frames or 25 or whatever. When a high frame rate is 60 or 120, while the photography is just 1 frame. So the exposure can be recalculated, reset every other frame. It's not a problem, but with the cinema, it's really vital that the exposure stays the same if you wish so. And so the cinematic lenses actually use T-stops instead of f-stops to receive the real amount of light. And why don't we have the same T-stops on the photographic lenses? Maybe there are some lenses that write it on the photographic lenses. I've never met it. So first, concerning the amount of light, we should really use T-stops. Then we'll have the precise idea of how much light we receive with the lens, and we can be sure that if we switch lenses from one to another, we receive absolutely the same exposure. So the T-stop is way out in this regards. Sometimes photographic lenses, in their characteristics, in their manuals, actually have T-stops. So some manufacturers actually give you the T-stop of the lens, even if it's a photographic lens. But it's really rare. They usually don't do that. They actually usually give you just the f-stop and nothing else. But even if they give you the T-stop in photographic lenses is, as a rule, is lower. Well, it's bigger, but the light transmission is lower than the f-stop. So usually this, say, f2 lens would be T2.8 lens or something like that. Or the f1.8 is actually T2.2 lens, as a rule, something like that. The t-stop is actually a little bit higher in number than the f-stop. So the f-stop again doesn't give us the precise information about the light transmission. So I believe even if photographic lenses, it would benefit us users to have t-stops instead of f-stops, at least to get the idea of the light transmission of the lens. So that's concerning the light. But concerning the bokeh and the depth of field, I have no idea what we can actually substitute these numbers with. Well, actually the t-stop will also give, just like the f-stop, the t-stop will give us some idea about the bokeh, but it depends on too many things, as I've described you earlier: the focal length, the distance to your subject, the optical design of the lens, the image sensor size. So there's maybe no way out to have the precise calculation of the bokeh, and especially no way to calculate the characteristic of the bokeh except for the optical formula inside of the lens, the design by manufacturer. So if you have any ideas, write down in the comments, but we've proved that f-stop does not give us an idea of precise amount of light that we get, and doesn't give us the exact amount of depth of field or bokeh. But if we could, we better use t-stops instead of f-stops. So again, f-stop is the wrong number of the lens. Focal length and the f-stop, just wrong numbers. We should better substitute it. Now going further, what else can we see on the lenses? We can find some letters, abbreviations, and even words like IS for image stabilization, AF, different autofocusing modes, USM, HSM, STM and stuff, aspherical for naming the aspherical elements in the construction and stuff. And these words are, well, basically true if the manufacturer is not lying to us. But there is some other figure that is often, almost always, met on the lens, and that is the minimum focusing distance. And it's regularly called the macro. You might find on your lens something saying macro and then centimeters, say 0.25, 0.39 or something like that. It may be written right on the barrel of the lens, or maybe not, like with this particular lens, but we can find it on the distance scale here. Come on, refocus. The minimum focusing distance here is 25 centimeters. I don't know if you see it. So the 25 centimeters here. They call it macro, and it means how close to the subject you can shoot, right? And they always write this minimum focusing distance, and they call it macro. That's the first thing. But sometimes, you know, there are special macro lenses that put some other figures on the lens, like 1:1, 1:2, or even 2:1. And what does that mean? And here we actually return to the magnification. Well, you know, in the beginning of the video, they told us that the focal length actually determines the magnification, and we proved that it's not. But now the minimum focusing distance determines it, but just to some extent. And what I mean, what is the minimum focusing distance, and how does it give us an idea of the magnification? Well, it doesn't. And there is a ratio, but the regular lenses usually doesn't give us the ratio, the magnification ratio. I'll tell you what this is in a second. But these special macro lenses, or regular lenses which have some macro abilities, they point it out separately, the magnification. But most lenses don't. They just give you the word macro and give you the minimum focusing distance. So how close you can get to the lens. And it's actually not from the lens itself, but I believe it's from the sensor to the subject. So what about the ratio? And the ratio is also relative, but it's supposed to be as such. The true macro is called 1:1 ratio, and it means that if you take the subject and place it like physically on your sensor, then in the resulting image the proportions are going to be the same. The size of the subject comparing to the size of the sensor or the picture is going to be the same as if you would take it and put it on your image sensor. That is called the true macro. Of course, most of the lenses don't give that, with the minimum focusing distance and shooting as close as you can, you actually get a smaller image than if you would put this subject and place it on your image sensor, because the magnification is not so big. But special macro lenses can do that, and there are actually the macro lenses that can zoom, not zoom, like focus even closer and give even bigger picture, so the magnification ratio more than 1:1. So they give you the bigger picture. These are like super macro lenses. Yes, they exist. And so for these macro lenses, they regularly point it out on the lens, 1:1, 1:2, 2:1 and stuff. And that's close to true, but it still makes it difficult to compare different lenses. So if, well, even lenses with the same minimum focusing distance, with the same focal length and same focusing distance, they can give you different magnification. Well, and how's that? Well, of course, the magnification depends on focal length and distance to your subject and the minimum focusing distance. And so here we have the 25 centimeters minimum focusing distance, and it gives some amount of magnification, but as I've told you, the lenses with the same focal length, with the same minimum focusing distance, can actually give you different magnification. And there is a formula to actually calculate the magnification, the ratio, and the magnification in figures, in fractions. And it's usually described as 0 point and some figure. And when it comes to 1, it means the magnification 1:1. And most lenses, of course, have less, much less. 1.11, 1.25 or something like that, magnification ratio. And when it comes to 1:1, just to 1, then that's called true macro. But what I mean that the minimum focusing distance and the word macro actually does not give us the idea of the actual magnification ratio. And what does? Well, the magnification ratio itself. So instead of pointing out the minimum focusing distance, well, okay, you can leave it on the barrel of the lens, but we better put the real magnification ratio on the lens. So thus we could compare the real magnification ratio of different lenses. So as well with the degrees, as well as with the t-stops of the lenses, the magnification ratio is all different with different lenses depending on the construction and depending on many different things. So just pointing out the magnification ratio on the lens would be much more honest from the manufacturer's point of view, and for us users to really determine the macro capabilities of our lenses. So this is probably the final figure. So all these figures are wrong and deceiving. So first, the focal length is wrong, the f-stop is wrong, and the minimum focusing distance as well. We better substitute it with degrees, with the t-stop at least for the light amount, and with the magnification ratio to get an idea of the real magnification. That's what I mean. That's telling you that all the figures on your lens, all these numbers are just wrong or at least deceiving. And that's all I wanted to tell you. And well, if you want, just compare the magnification ratios of different lenses, or I put it to you on the screen. So that's all I wanted to tell you. Subscribe to the channel, press like, press dislike twice if you don't like the video, and leave a comment what you think about all these 3 topics, and what should we talk about it more. Let's do this in the comment section. Now I'm dead tired after shooting this long video, so I'll see you around. Paul Kretz was here with you. Bye bye.